or something like that, so that they can see that you can go deep. And if you go all the way down the rabbit hole, if you need to get super technical, this is what it would look like. But here's the larger breadth of what the spread would look like. So you kind of sketch the outline of the high level epics and then just flesh out the details of one aspect of that. And so that's what's like that's typically how I would recommend approaching that. And then when they challenge you to say, well, have you thought about it? It's like, yeah, it's these other epics that I didn't flesh out. Like that would fall under this epic here. And so you can kind of reason through it. But you can say, look, for realistics of time, I'm demonstrating the quality of my work. I can demonstrate that I can be comprehensive and I can be detailed, but I don't need to develop a full end-to-end solution in the time that I have available. And so that's typically how I would look at answering those questions. If you need to give an example of like epics, user stories, tasks, backlog, like what did you actually do? Kind of start really broad and high level, and then pick one and get more detail, and then pick one or two and get more detail, one or two, so that the detail gets narrower and narrower and narrower, so they can still see examples of it, but they can also see that you can think broadly about the problem. And that's kind of what you're trying to demonstrate in the case study anyway, right?
Yeah, very, very insightful and practical advice, Roger. Thank you so much. I think I really like the first one because I don't think I ever stopped to think, okay, this thing I've put forward, can I actually make it smaller? In my head, I was just like, yeah. I really don't have time, because again, my fault, because I tried to round up everything like a day before the deadline, and I was just rushing. I was like, yeah, let me just go and get this thing out. So yeah, I should have definitely stopped to think how much smaller can I get this. So in trying to, give myself more feedback and learn from my mistakes, I read an article that said that you shouldn't necessarily. So I want to get your take on the article. If I can find the link, I'll share it on Slack. But then the author was basically saying, like, we shouldn't break down requirements. Rather, we should. How do I put this? So we shouldn't go top to bottom. We should go bottom to top. So we should like outline the user's problems, create stories for those problems, and then consolidate into like epics and features going up. So I don't know which what you think about it. Is it better to go like top down or bottom up?
There isn't an exact, like, whatever works in your scenario. Different scenarios will work differently. I don't think there's a hard rule of you have to go one way or the other. Some people will find it easier to think big picture first and then go details. Some people like to go very outcome focused. So what I've kind of done with like this quarter OKRs, we've reworked the way we do OKRs like quite considerably. And sort of what we did was we've got some like, I've been trying to shift away from like being focused on like delivery and features and outputs and being more outcome focused. And so I thought about, well, if my team was 50 people, how would I group the teams? And then what would the vision of each of those teams be? What goals would those teams have? Like, what would they need to achieve? And then what would the key results or deliverables measures be of whether we're hitting those goals? And so I did that, basically broke the team up into 3 different teams, like a consumer area, a customer area, and then the infrastructure area. And each of those had like a vision of what they're trying to achieve. Each of them had goals, and we broke that down. And I created this with the team. So we jumped on a call, said, okay, I kind of had a bit of an outline. I had 1 or 2 goals each. And then we fleshed that out. And then I went back to say, okay, what is my quarterly plan of what the business needs us to deliver? What is those things we need to ship? And then which of those goals are we working towards when we're shipping those things? And so my OKRs are then those goals, but what we're delivering are those things. So I kind of high-level framework, lower-level detail, and then tie the two together and then look for inconsistencies and look for like, hey, where are we doing something that actually shouldn't be a goal or isn't a real goal and thing? So using the detail to help refine the goals and the objectives, but using the details and objectives to refine that how big the task needs to be in order to actually achieve what's effective. So it's a bit of a balance. Is a very long answer to a short question.
Yes, and it's an interesting answer. I feel I would probably want to try out like both ways in maybe any subsequent projects that I'm doing, to just like experience it and see what works best. Probably maybe is based on personal style, maybe based on what you're working on. But yeah, I would experiment and see what works for me.
Yeah, I mean, if people are interested in that, I'm happy to run through the demo. I'm happy to show what I run through if anyone wants to see a bit more detail there. I think the one other thing you mentioned is the MVP, the minimum viable product. The way you get there is by taking something away and say, it's only the minimal if you take it away and you can't, and then it's no longer viable. So if you take away a feature or a story or an aspect of it, and then the thing no longer solves the customer's problem, that's when you've gone too small. So then you put that thing back and you take something else out and see, is this still viable? Does this actually still solve the customer's problem? If it does, let's leave it out. If it doesn't, let's put it back. Let's try and take something else out. And once there's nothing you can take away that still, as soon as you take any part of it away, it will no longer solve the customer's problem. That's when you know you've reached a point of that's what the minimal viable product is.
Yeah, that's a very, very nice and insightful way to think about it. Thank you so much.
Cool.
Hi, Roger. Good evening.
Hi, Best.
Hi, how have you been? Thank you for coming in.
Sure thing.
Hello, guys. Good evening. Apologies for coming in here late. So welcome to another session. All right. If you have questions, please leave them in the chat. Roger, thank you for joining us today. Apologies for what happened in June. Thank you. Right. Okay. So just to add to the question, right. I think it was asking about an MVP. So I have a follow-up question there. Right. When is it right to retire an MVP from the market or a full version product generally? When do you think is right to do that?
I mean, when it's no longer fulfilling the need. So typical an MVP is there to prove a hypothesis, but if you prove that it works and it is viable and people do want it, they're normally going to want more pretty quickly, and so then you should keep building on it, or say, okay, cool, the way we solved this initially, the corners we cut initially is not sustainable. We need to then re-architect it and launch a full version 1. But if you can iterate from your MVP and just flesh it into your ideal solution, your version 1, then absolutely do that and make it a continuum instead of a hard switch. I'm not a big fan of big releases and big launches. I generally think you're gonna come pretty short. So that I would normally, if you can evolve it towards where you're going, but obviously there's going to be some architectural things that might not make sense to get in place right in the beginning. So if that's the case, then yeah, you probably want to do a hard switch. But I would only kill a product when it is no longer solving the needs or the outcomes that you set to achieve.
Okay. Now, speaking of big releases, yeah. So there's this argument going on in the product community. Are MVPs still viable? Should we put out MVPs in 2024? Because I've come across arguments like that on Twitter, right? And in some other product communities and stuff. So the argument is it viable to put out MVPs in 2024? Does that make sense?
Is it viable to put out a minimum viable product? Well, if it's not viable, then it's not an MVP. Yeah, I look, there's been so much talk over the last number of years around minimal lovable product or minimal sellable product or minimal investable. I don't know. The whole point is that you're de-scoping it down to its core that solves your customer's problem. Is it unrealistic to ship a minimal product that still solves your customer's need? Not at all. What is considered viable is kind of where the semantics and where people get caught up. Sometimes for a consumer product, it has to look really slick for consumers to want to use it. Often it'll look way slicker than the functionality that'll be there. For a B2B product, it probably has to have more functionality to be viable than brand and look and feel. So it's viable depends on the customer. But for me, the reflection is, does it solve the customer's need? Is it something that the customer will use to solve that problem? And if the answer to that is not a resounding yes, or not a yeah, probably, if we give it to people, will they start using it? If you give it to them and they don't start using it, it's not viable. You need to keep adding to it or changing it or tweaking it until it is the minimal thing that will actually solve their problem. And that may be adding brand, it may be adding more features, it may be taking features away, it may be confusing it, or maybe repositioning it, or like communicating it. Like there's a bunch of things you can change in that. But yeah, that's typically where you run. Normally, like if you go by the lean startup, what is not Eric Ries, the guy behind that, of kind of the 4 steps to the epiphany, Stanford professor. Anyway, 4 steps to the epiphany, customer discovery, customer creation, so something scale, and then the business building is like the 4 steps. And he kind of coined the word pivot. It was like back in like the 80s. And if you go from customer discovery to customer creation, so customer discovery is find people with a problem, and you create the thing is when you can solve that problem for them. Like, can you deliver something that solves the problem? And if you can't deliver something that solves the problem, you need to pivot. And when you pivot, you have one of 3 levers to pull. You change your product, your market, or the delivery mechanism and how you deliver that product to that market. So like Netflix changed the delivery mechanism of movies to consumers. The market was the same, the product was the same, but the delivery mechanism moved to a rental streaming model instead of a physical ship model. So it's like those are the 3 core levers you have to pull when you're in a pivot. And there's lots of I think there's lots of really basic fundamentals around this, but then there's been lots of interpretation and thinking and writing and opinions thrown into the mix. But if you cut it down to what it actually means, or like what's actually useful, it's normally pretty simple. You don't need to overcomplicate it with is it viable to something viable? I don't know. Like, what does that even mean?
Yeah. Because so that actually, I've been looking for someone who's going to, because the way I understand it, right? MVPs are for testing the market, obviously, and trying to see what customers want, and then pivoting to a better version of the product. But it's become an argument lately. Some people say MVPs are dead. Okay, so that raises concerns, because how do you want to test software products? Do you understand? So how do you want to validate a software product now? Do you need to build a full-fledged product, like a version 1, of an entire but I understand the whole delivery system Netflix switched from to which made sense, and because of times and market demand now and technology innovation, so that was needed, right? But right now, in this time and age, is it does it make sense to still have an MVP? I know I've asked this question already, but
I shipped an MVP 2 weeks ago.
Oh, okay. Right.
Yeah, we redid our entire dashboard, and we shipped an MVP, which has exactly the same features as we had before, with a new look and feel. But it's a fundamental architectural shift in how we deliver what we need to deliver, because it's going to enable a completely new set of features that we're releasing soon. But so that's an MVP where basically we released an entire new version with no new functionality. Like there was zero new functionality, but it was the minimal viable of the new architectural step that we needed to. We just reskinned the old features without building any new features. We reskinned it and shipped it, and have started putting stubs in. So on the analytics tab, you click on analytics, and I've got a Google form that they're like, hey, analytics are coming soon. Tell us what you were expecting to find here, and we'll make sure we build it. So we're using the new architecture and the new structure to gather the information and the requirements and the feedback to keep improving and building on that new product. So is that an MVP? Oh, fuck, I don't know. It's like a semantics, right? Does it really matter? I don't think so.
Okay. Thank you very much. So regardless of product or industry, it still matters, correct?
No, I mean, your language. So here's an article I wrote last week around when good advice is wrong for you. And really the core of the article is, I mean, it's more aimed at startup founders, but it's really looking at it creates a quadrant of deep tech or tech enabled and startup and SME. And depending on which quadrant you're in that thing, if you're a deep tech startup or if you're a tech enabled SME, the advice you need is totally different. Should you get a technical co-founder? If you're a deep tech business, absolutely. If you're not, probably not. It doesn't make sense to do that initially. Outsource your tech. Like, should you be raising venture capital? Well, if you're a high growth startup, yes, probably, like, it might make sense in certain cases, and there's nuances to that. If you're on the other end, if you're a small business, you definitely shouldn't, because you're not going to get the returns at the times you need. So it's not that like raising venture capital is bad advice. It's just, it's only advice for a segment of people. So like that whole article was really just me like shaking my fist at the cloud around how like so many startup mentors don't actually take into the context of the startup into which advice is right for them. They just give the same advice to everyone. And I think what I'm hearing from you is the same thing, is like, are MVPs viable? It's like, well, it depends. Like, are you in a segment or a quadrant where that makes sense? How are you articulating, how are you defining what an MVP is and how that makes sense? And if those things are correct, then yes, an MVP might make sense or it might not. So I think the context that you're delivering the advice into matters. And if people are giving the same generic advice across all contexts, they're doing something wrong.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. So someone is asking here in the Q&A, says, I'm having to manage a team of product managers now, and one of my OKRs is to monitor their performance on a weekly basis. I'm not sure how to measure them or what to really track or keep an eye on. How do I typically monitor a team's performance, or advice I go about it? Let me try to put out the question in the general group, so general comments, so you can see that.
Yeah, I see it there. So yeah, this
is the question here.
Yeah, this question, it depends on so many things. The principle that I would try and get right is you want to measure people on how they're performing towards what success looks like for you. Now, that might change per team, it might change per product, it might be the same across the entire company. And if it's the same, then you can measure them all on the same things. If it's things like, but if you really want to measure value performance, you want to measure like, what does if they are 100% successful and deliver the best possible thing, what will that look like? And then what would I be able to measure to know that we've achieved that? And once you know that, you're like, now I know how to define or measure whether we're getting to those outcomes. And once I've got that, I can then say, well, are those leading or lagging indicators? Are they leading indicators of good behavior that will make that more likely that I could track on a weekly basis if those are lagging indicators? So let me maybe just literally share what I've been working on over the last 2 weeks with my quarterly planning. Allow to share a window. Share this window. Is it coming up? See me? Yeah, there we go. Okay, so yeah, I'll make this a bit smaller. So this was something me just like thinking about, like, hold on, how do we shift towards more empowered product teams? And how do I do that? So I kind of looked at like each team, like what is the area of responsibility addressed by a cross-functional group? So the thing that I'm trying to challenge is our developers and the designers and PMs kind of work in one way, and then we define what needs to happen and then loop the developers in late in the process. So I'm trying to bring developers in early to be more part of the process and share more of the ownership of deliverables. So kind of what we looked at is like, what is the area of responsibility? What is the vision we're building towards? I gave a timeline over 3 years because that felt right for us as a startup. And then what is the goal of like, what is a area of focus or something we want to be able to achieve? That's like, what does success look like for this? And then results are sort of measurable outcomes. This is very much version 1. Not all of these are measurable outcomes. We can totally do improvements on that. But my 3 teams was basically the collecting data team. So we do address verification. We have our SDKs. We have 4 different SDKs, a web SDK. We have OK Collect Web, which is the screens that get put, the web views that get pulled into the SDKs. And we have OKHad.me, which is the consumer play. And the vision there is to simply create an accurate address and collect data reliably for all users. Like, that's the vision of what this team needs to look like. We know we're getting there if we've seamless integration and stable tech. So if companies can seamlessly integrate our SDKs and the SDKs are stable and up to date and that sort of thing. If we streamline the address creation and permissions, if it's slick and smooth to create address and give permission, location permissions and those sort of things, get that going. You kind of get the point, like running through that. The next team was results to customers. So this is our customer dashboard. The company's called OK High, so all our products are OK Dash or OK Collect or OK Things. You'll see that. But anyway, then we have the webhook APIs, third-party services for physical verification and the likes, and then our documentation. So that's what the vision is, to be a location intelligent platform to meet all of our customers' needs. And then there's a goal is deliver on our customers' verification needs. Like, we need to identify what those are. We need to measure them. We need to think. And so how we might know that is like XX amount of physical verifications processed. I run physical and digital verifications on the same address, shows that we're doing a blended approach of doing digital and physical. Reduce or automate the webhook replays to make, because that's like the most common customer request we get. Customize user flows and functionality. So that's more of a, like, that's not quite measurable enough. And like I said, some of these need to be tightened up. Another one is like foster more reliable results. So we deliver the verification results faster, reduce the average verification completion time, increase the percentage verified, nudging user behavior if it's likely unfavorable. So if it looks like you're not going to be verified, how do we get you to change your behavior? And then all customers trust the data in our dashboards. So those are like those are like outcomes. Like, we will have achieved faster, more reliable results if we're seeing evidence of these things. And so I did that for each of the teams. Even the infrastructure team has those goals and things around it. So for me, this then became, I then actually ran, there we go. Let's go all the way down the rabbit hole if you want. Let me know if this is too deep and you want me to come out. Sorry, it's not loading. 2024 Q3 product plan. So the beginning of this quarter, every quarter I write a quick review of the previous quarter, and then a quick of like what the next quarter looks like. I've got my overarching company strategy, which is the top of every plan. And then we've got this thing around CBN, digital and physical verification. I'm sure you've seen that if you've played in the space. And then focus areas. We're going to grow the successful verification, foster verifications, better quality, and set up for scale. And then off the back of this, we then sat with each team and said, for the collecting data team, what are we going to work on and which goals do those associate to? So we're going to do this, and it aligns with the goals we defined on the other sheet. And so we ran that for like, this is kind of going top down, bottom up, but I'm trying to find, it still needs a bit of refinement, but it's kind of balancing that of like being more outcome focused while still being clear on measuring how much do we have to deliver on re-verification. Well, we need to do it so that it delivers against goal 2.4. Once we're doing that, it's enough, we can move on. So that's the kind of thinking and the approach that I've gone. But it's really been trying to shift the team towards outcome focus instead of output focus, and thinking more about the measures of success, of what is the impact this will have when we release it, and use that as a way to measure team effectiveness and team delivery. And I mean, we've got a developer, we've got 6 developers working on this, or there's 8 if you include the infrastructure team. So it's really not like, there's not 3 teams worth of people. Thinking about it like this has helped me reason through how we would measure what success looks like for each of these different features or releases that we're looking at doing. Was that interesting? Is that useful?
Yeah, that's interesting and a lot at the same time. So, but thank you. It was a lot. It was a lot. Well, it was interesting. So this is I think that depicts how you manage goals, objectives, and results delivery, and for which makes sense now. Thank you very much. Thank you. So we have someone else posting a question. How do I estimate effort that I need a dev team to build? At my former company, one of our culture was intellectual honesty. And as such, we trusted devs to give us estimates for tasks and hold them accountable. I'm now at a different company and we don't have such values. Should I continue to just trust developers with the estimates they give me? How else can I approach this, please? What's your advice? I think I have issues with this as well. So I'm also open to learning that.
Yeah, like the thing that I feel people are most disingenuous about when trying to plan software is acknowledging the massive amounts of uncertainty that are inherent in what we do. So it's like, if you think about, we're trying to design virtual houses. Like we're trying to design houses in the clouds. And like builders in the real world, where everything is known, you know the ground, you know the land, you know the level, you know the size of the bricks, you know the plumbing, you know the distances, the lengths, you can walk out and measure it. All of those things are very easy to measure and very easy to define. And we still can't build a house on time and on budget. So how do you possibly expect to be able to do that reliably in an imaginary house in a world where there are 8 people or 10 people, all with a different image in their head of what this imaginary house needs to look like and how it's going to work? So it's like, and then we expect it to come on time and thing. And like, that's the entire purpose of why waterfall doesn't work. And it's because inherently, it's because it doesn't acknowledge the uncertainty in what you're building. And so that's the biggest thing when you're trying to measure performance. Like if you're trying to measure exact output and hit exact deadlines and that sort of stuff, you're doing something wrong, because the only way you get to that level of certainty about future development is about brushing over some uncertainty somewhere in the process. And so when I was running a dev house, when we used to scope for a project, I would ask the developer, we kind of scoped out all the pages and any major chunks of functionality, like a Facebook integration, or we need this page and this page needs to have a form, and that page needs to pull from a menu item or pull a friends list from Facebook or whatever. So the developer has a rough idea. And then I'd have them estimate, like, how long do you think it would take you to do this in like half days? So it's a half day or a day, or in some cases it was a quarter day. And then that would be my minimum estimate. And then I would have another column that would say, like, what is, and for double it from complexity and double it for uncertainty. So even if I know exactly how to do it, there's no uncertainty, but it's a complex task, my other estimate would be double that. And so we would then come up with this range. And if it was uncertain and complex, it would be quadruple what the initial estimate was. And so then it comes up with this range, and we can sum it up for the whole project to say, look, the release is going to come somewhere between 8 to 12 weeks or 8 to 16 weeks. And the first thing clients would say is like, that's ridiculous. Why is there so much? It's like, well, great. Now let's talk about where the uncertainty is in this project and what we don't know. And let's start there and build for that first. And we'll build and test these uncertain areas and get that uncertainty down to get you more specific. But it also helped me have this conversation with customers of, do you want this problem solved for minimal cost? In which case we'll cut a whole bunch of the unnecessary features, we'll ship just the bare minimum within the minimum time, or do you want all the bells and whistles? And so it helped frame conversations around uncertainty in a more honest way. And I think that's what a lot of people get around, like measuring team performance. That's why, like typically that's why people use like t-shirt sizes or these like weightings. Those should not correspond to number of hours, because if you're doing that, you may as well just use hours, and then you're not acknowledging the uncertainty, because you're trying to ask the developers to tell me exactly how many hours will it take to mount this invisible cabinet on the invisible wall, knowing that there's no pipes behind it. And they're like, well, I don't know, it'll take me 2 hours. And then they do it and they hit a pipe and there's water everywhere, and it's 3 days later, you're still fucking fixing the cabinet. But it's like, that's just what happens. That's the reality of it. And so trying to plan to too much detail without acknowledging that is actually just being dishonest. And so working in like velocity and story points and t-shirt sizing and that sort of stuff is designed to add some fuzziness into it so that you'll actually be less precise but more accurate. And so there's a distinction between precision of being exactly right and being accurate, which is like more or less but more likely right. Because you can be precise but be exactly wrong. You can be precise but inaccurate. Like, I know exactly what my margin of error is, but I missed the deadline by 3 months. Or I can, hey, I'm going to end sometime plus or minus a week or 2 within this date in 3 months in advance. You'll be accurate because you'll have reached that range, but it's less precise. And so that's often what you need to look for, is like, why does business do they need precision or do they need accuracy? And if they need precision, you need to give a lot of fat to take into account the unknown and the uncertainty into what you're doing. I don't know if that actually answered your question.
Hello,
Judith,
Judith, are you there? Did I answer your question?
Yes, I am. Yes, you did. Thank you, Roger.
Okay, great.
Thank you. That was really valuable. Thank you very much. Okay. Onyedika, you wanted to say something? Do you have a question, please?
Yeah, question. Roger, I really like how you think about things because they're like very practical and valuable. Um, so going back to like the goals and even what you just explained, I think my question is a bit abstract. It's more of how do you think about, like, how do you come up with these frameworks? Is it maybe articles you read? If it's articles you read or like sources of inspiration, where can we get it? Or like generally, is there like a mental model or thought framework that you use to come up? Because for the estimation bits, when she raised the question, the first thing that entered my head was, oh, I'm guessing that's what the engineering manager is there for, right? If you have an engineering manager that can keep the engineers honest, I mean, it just helps. It goes a long way. But being able to like estimate things in these quarter days or half days is very realistic for both you and for the engineers, because like you mentioned, complexity and uncertainty. There might be things that the engineers feel would take a couple of days or a couple of hours, but when they start working on it, they see like, oh, there's some things that we've not figured out here, and it just keeps on extending, right? So I really like the thought process around like the quarter days, half days, and full days. But yeah, generally, like, how do you come up with like these processes or frameworks or mental models? Is it a matter of experience? Is it like a certain way of thinking about things, or is it just like articles?
Yeah, I think it's a matter of two things. One is it is my experience, and I mean, I've coached and mentored probably 80 different product teams or early stage startups launching new products, like helping them ship and helping them work out. So I've just seen a lot go wrong. It's partly that. I think it's also partly the way I'm wired. I also think very much in first principles. So like this product team, this empowered product team's approach and the goals and things. I was trying to reflect on like what is actually bugging me about the way that we currently do it. What I came up with is like we're too much thinking about releases and features and not thinking enough about value and measure. So I go, okay, well, how would I define that value and measure? Like, what does that actually look like? And that kind of got me down the path of like, our team, there's so much overlap and it's hard to see, and we're shipping quite a small, 6 developers. Like we actually don't ship that much of that quick. We ship pretty quickly for the size, but we're not actually shipping that much, and the features aren't that big because we're a small team. So I was like, well, okay, what happens if I scale the team up to 50 people, 60 people? What would change? And then I started thinking through with a mental model of like, well, how would I do it for them, and does that translate? And so I tried different things and eventually settled on this approach. But it's kind of like going from like what could go wrong, or what does success look like? And so starting right at the end of the journey to unpack what would be valuable if we got there, and then what might a path be in order for us to get there. So like, what are we actually trying to solve for? Instead of trying to solve it, dive in and solve it, it's like try and frame the problem more effectively. If you can do that, it often becomes, the solution becomes a lot simpler.
Oh, thanks. Just two follow-up questions, right? I think the second one is
I'll give you one.
Okay. So one is a question, one is not a question. I just guys ask if it's possible to get like a template of the goals, not Q3 now. The goals, like matching goals with like the Q3 plan or a quarterly plan, something like that. It's very rough. It's no need to like add like the high details in, if that's possible. The main question
these are very specific to our company and to what we're trying to achieve. So if you want, like, rather ask a question in the group saying, for this sort of team, what would a vision and goals look like? And I can help you flesh something out. Like, let's work with an example instead of just working with a hypothetical.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. Thank you so much. I think the main question is, you listen to a lot of these foreign companies, Brex, Mercury, and all that, and they say, oh, they ship stuff like every day, or they ship once a month, or they have like specific release dates. And working back to like the estimation efforts where we want to like lead with outcomes and stuff, is it still possible to lead with outcomes and have like those specific release dates or release cycles where you want to push out like features based on your calendar or roadmap?
Yeah, so I mean, I think Lenny did a podcast, an episode recently on this, or an article. It's like the difference between releases and launches. And so like Shopify launches like 200 to 300 times a day, as because they're doing a continuous delivery type thing. The developers are constantly pushing things, but they have feature flags, which is a way of turning off certain aspects of the code you're shipping and only turning it on for certain customers in a config file, like buttons or features or new pages or new sections, so you can A/B test stuff and do that. So they're constantly shipping new code to production to small segments of live customers. But the marketing releases of when, hey, we've launched something new, only happen like once every 3 months. And that's like you line up your emails and your newsletters and your events and your announcements and all that sort of stuff together with launches and like marketing launches. But most of the time, by the time you get to a marketing launch, those products have already been used by hundreds or in some cases thousands of users in various different iterations and tests to make sure it's right before you do the full launch. So I think it's more down to like how you define releases and launches. And you should be like, if you're releasing things that often, you need a framework of knowing what's effective and what is the impact of the things we're shipping and testing. And you need to know that before you ship that feature or that item. And so that's kind of what you need to think about, is like, what would success, if this really took off and was successful, what difference would I see in our metrics? And then define that metric up front before you ship it, and a week or two later, check that metric and say, has it actually had the impact I thought it had? And if not, roll it back, take it out of the code, or make a change and try it again. So that's kind of the difference.
Thank you so much, Roger. Very, very insightful again. Thanks.
Cool.
Hi. Okay. Thank you very much, Roger. Thank you for that. All right. I for one, I think I've missed you a lot on this space. You come here with so much knowledge. So yeah, thank you. Okay, so we have I think one last question for this evening. The question says, in a minute, so I'll put it up. So someone is asking here, in an organization where product marketing does not sit within the product team, how can one address product marketing considerations within this structure? In an organization where product marketing does not sit within product team, where we have in an organization where we usually have specialized teams now, product team, then product marketing, various departments and stuff. So how can one address product marketing considerations within that structure now, as say product manager?
I mean, so let me just clarify. I'm not 100% sure what this question is actually answering, but I'm going to try and answer it. And whoever's question it was, if I don't answer it, ask a follow-on. So I think you will totally have different teams, but if you can think about what success looks like, or like product marketing is really there around communicating things that have been released and tested things. So I'm a big fan of just having them sit in some of your planning meetings or some of your release review meetings. Like once you've shipped code, in your retros, is that product marketing person sitting in your retros? Sorry, I'm busy breastfeeding a toddler on the side. So like, is that product marketing person is sitting in your retros to know what's releases, what's coming up, what's working, what's not working in the thing? Sorry, I'm just going to drop my camera. So this is what I'm actually doing in my spare time. I'm just dropping my camera so I can stand and bounce. It's like, can you bring that product marketing person closer into the planning, into the sessions? Like, even if they're not in your team, it doesn't mean they can't sit in a bunch of your workshops or in your meetings or your retros to get the information they need in order to create a tighter cycle. Right?
Right.
I don't know whose question that was, but did that answer your question?
Yeah, I sort of agree with that too, because they are product marketers. They are people who convey the product to the users now. So yes, when decisions are made, I think they need to be in the room and try to understand what goes on and why a feature needs to go out. So I think I totally agree with you right there.
Yeah,
Thank you very
it's
much.
like they're just a stakeholder you need to manage.
Mhm.
And you can bring them in, like the more context you can share with them, the more
Mhm.
effective they're going to be at delivering what they need to deliver, and the more feedback they're going to give to you about what should
Right.
be going into the roadmap, because that's what they're seeing is needed next.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So do you think a PM can make a successful UX designer? Can
Well,
become a
yes,
successful
because
UX designer?
yeah, I mean like firstly, PM is such a broad term. There's many people who start in UX design and become PMs. And in different companies, it means different things. I actually do quite a lot of UX. I don't do UI, well, I do a little bit of UI, but
Right.
I actually do, like for the new releases for the OK Dash, for our customer dashboards, I kind of conceptualized most of that because our designer has been working on a whole bunch of other stuff. He's been pulled off in other parts of the company. And so I checked in with him like once or twice a week for like an hour, or half an hour. But for the most part, I was doing the designing and the layouts and the architectural, the information architecture of what needs to go there. And in doing that, the reason I did it myself is because it helped me work out what is the position in the market, like what are we trying to be as a company. Like with the CBN shift that basically pulled the rug out from under us, like what do we need to be, what needs to be true in order for us to be successful in order to get this right, and then what do we need to adjust around our frameworks and the way we're delivering our information to users in a way that enables all of those futures, our current future, our current and for our future. And so shifting towards like a blended thing, how do we make a verification, instead of the thing that we do, just make it one of many actions that we take. And so that's kind of been a strategic shift in how we architect what we do, but it's come from a business need of a shift, and it's come from me trying to rework what a new UX might look like, and chatting to users and interviewing them and working out what they use and how they use it, and then feeding that into the business strategy, and then coming up with an architectural information architecture, and ultimately some high-level wireframes that the designer then stepped in, fleshed out, and did a skin on, and then applied the UI and ran through. And he still added tons of value, don't get me wrong. But yeah, there's absolutely, you can do, a PM can be a developer, testers, UX, UI, even business strategy. I think there's no one size fits all.
Right. That's right. Thank you very much. I think I have one more question. Just one more. Apologies for that.
If anyone else does, throw it in or throw your hand up.
Okay, so I think I have one more question. Let me put it up so others can see. So how can a PM balance the need for innovation with maintaining a consistent user experience across product portfolio? No. Need for innovation with maintaining a consistent user experience. There is innovation, there is market demand and stuff. So how do you balance all that and still maintain a good user experience across board?
Geez, you asked the biggest question at the end. I think innovation is a big fuzzy word as well. So let's break that down. Like, innovating is either delivering something new or delivering something current in a new or disruptive way. So if you're thinking about how you do that, like, you could probably deliver, like, both of those are information architecture, strategic shifts. It's like at the UX level, not the UI level. The UI, like how you design the interface, how you apply the brand colors and structure and logo and that sort of thing, versus how the user moves through the different parts of the app or moves through the thing in order to achieve what they need to achieve. Often ways in which, like one of the ways in which you can look for innovation disruption is by removing or removing a step from a value stream. So I've done quite a lot of work before where you you like map the value stream of how do we create value in the system? What are the steps we need to follow in order to deliver value? And then how do we take a step out or massively improve it? So if you look at like Uber, if the value stream of getting a taxi, like you get a taxi, you phone it, or you contact the taxi arrives, they pull up, you climb in, you drive. At the end of it, you get the price, you have to pay, you do that. Like Uber removed the payment step entirely. Like their big innovation was there are two innovations. One, you call it from an app instead of from a phone or a curb. So you call it from an app. Because you call it from the app, you can now see it en route. And the other innovation was you don't pay. Now, when you get to your destination, you just get out of the car. Payment just happens. And it's magical. And you're like left feeling like, oh, thank you, kind sir. I'm now at this fancy hotel and I can just step out of my vehicle. I'm not haggling with cash and fighting over price. So that they completely disrupted and changed that because they just removed that step entirely. So, I mean, there's lots of different ways of doing innovation, but that's just an example of you could have a payment step or have no payment step, and it would change your UX and your flow, but it wouldn't change the UI or the layout or the buttons or the thing of how you do it. Does that make sense? So you can make something feel consistent, even though it's a totally different approach.
Right. Makes sense. Thank you, Roger. Thank you
As
for
a quick hat tip. I feel value stream mapping is one of the skills that is massively underrated in PM. Like being able to look at a system and draw a flowchart of how value moves through the system, specifically identifying where value is created and where value is captured. Like if you can do that, you're a head and shoulders above everyone else. I've actually been working with Trefford on a potential PM course, and it's like there's an entire module just on value stream mapping and how you think about system and how you think about value creation in a system and systems thinking. But anyway.
I think we would like access to the course if you don't mind. Anyways, thank you very much. Thank you.
It's still very much in early stage, and Trefford's going to be selling it. So.
Okay, right.
But yeah, we can totally run a workshop. If you want to do one of these sessions as a workshop instead, I can totally run a value stream mapping workshop if that's easier for you. That kind of messes with your formula.
So I think we're going to invite you for. We're going to invite you on a session for that. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Roger, for coming in. Thank you guys for joining to this session. So we have other programs, all right? We have interview prep sessions twice a month on Tuesdays like this. Then webinars twice a month, which happens on Thursdays as well. Then weekly check-in calls are every Saturday. So I hope you guys join and gain some value. Thank you for coming in today. And we're going to see you on Tuesday for interview prep session. Mr. Roger, thank you very much. Thank you. And have a good evening.
Cool. I'll be back in 2 weeks. Say bye to baby Odin.
Yeah, right. We hope to see you back in 2 weeks. Thank you. Right. Just before you guys go, all right. If you have questions, so we're going to collect questions for the next time Roger is here. Right. So the form is going to go out again. So please submit your questions, and we'll make sure to address them two Tuesdays from today. All right. So that'll be it. Thank you. And have a good evening.
Good night, guys.